You've probably already seen the most common problem. The workflow performs one step, but the next screen is not ready yet, but the bot keeps moving and the following step fails. Not because the node is wrong, but because the workflow moved too fast. Welcome back to the MoreLogin automation course. I'm Ethan. If this course series has been helpful to you, please let me know by liking and subscribing. Today we'll dive into 3 important logic nodes: wait, loop, and switch. They solve different problems, but together, they help your workflow become much more stable and much more flexible. So let's start with the most practical one. Wait is the node you use when the workflow should pause before continuing. This is one of the most useful logic nodes in real workflows because many failures happen simply because the next step starts too early. And we can see the first important field is wait method. When you want a controlled, predictable pause, choose fixed value. The workflow pauses for one exact duration. When you want more natural timing variation, use random time. The workflow pauses for a random amount of time between min and max. So each run can pause a little differently as long as it stays inside that range. One important thing to remember is that wait should be used for general timing control, not as a substitute for everything. If the real problem is wait until this element appears, then in many cases, it prefers using the find element node's built-in maximum wait time parameter to wait for specific elements to appear rather than adding blind waits. Next, let's look at loop. Loop is the node you use when the workflow needs to repeat the same step or the same group of steps more than once. Instead of copying the same action over and over again on the canvas, loop lets you repeat that logic in a controlled way. Look at here. The first important field is loop type: number, loop, and array loop. If we choose number loop, the workflow will repeat the enclosed steps a fixed number of times, then define loop count, either as a number or as a referenced variable. For example, to make the bot scroll through the page, a single swipe is definitely not enough, so we use a loop to make it repeat the upward swipe action. Here, you can clearly see the workflow sliding upwards again and again, which is exactly what we want it to do. And we can get current index here, which tells us which iteration we're on. Then if we choose array loop, the workflow iterates through each item in an array. That means you first need an array to work with. For example, first, we open the search box and create a list to store the content we need. Here, we use run.js script, which will be explained in detail in the next video. Click on the array loop and reference this list in the loop array. Then we add input text to use this content. To make this clearer, we press enter after typing, and add wait to prevent repetitive operations from happening too quickly. This way, the workflow can automatically and continuously search the list I provided. We also can get current item, which is the actual item being processed in that pass. However, reality is complex, and mindless repetition is not an option. This is where switch comes in. Switch is the node you use when the workflow needs to choose between different paths. So instead of always moving forward in one straight line, the workflow can branch depending on what condition is true. Here we only need to define the rule for each branch in when condition is met. This is also quite simple, just need to input a specific variable and determine which conditions it satisfies. If you need to compare the size of numbers, choose greater than, less than, greater than, or equal to, less than, or equal to. If you need to catch keywords, choose contains, does not contain, equals, not equal. And if you want to determine whether a specific element appears on a page, use exists or does not exist. If that condition is true, the workflow enters that branch. For example, we can set a branch in the loop to skip when the list content is anti-detect browser. After adding the switch, the bot became smarter. It no longer spouts the same canned response to everyone it encounters. Instead, it has learned to read the situation. You can see that the workflow has completely skipped the search for anti-detect browser and has begun searching for the next item on the list. Okay, that's all. In the next lesson, we'll build on this logic layer and look at how workflows can work with data more intelligently and connect to outside information when needed. Thanks for watching and hoping to see you in the next video.